Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Not because of the food, though I did love the way cinnamon and clove lingered in the air for days. Not even because of the family gathering, though I cherished every moment spent around the table. No, it was the quiet gratitude the day brought. A reminder, even in the hardest years, that I was still here, still fighting, still holding on to some kind of hope. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. That year, hope was wearing thin. I had just enough in my checking account to cover the groceries. I'd skipped buying my medication for the second month in a row and spent most of November wearing the same coat I'd owned for over a decade. I told myself it was fine. My son was coming home. Michael was successful, maybe even rich by now, and I was proud of him. His company was in the news last summer after a big expansion, and although he didn't visit often, I didn't hold it against him. He was building a life. I just missed being part of it. I started cooking at 6 in the morning, cranberry stuffing, green bean casserole, mashed potatoes with real butter. Not the margarine I usually used. The turkey was small, but it would do. I'd saved coupons for a month just to make sure I could afford a proper meal. By the time the doorbell rang, my tiny house smelled like the holidays I used to know back when his father was still alive. When laughter echoed through every room, I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Michael stood there with that same confident smile he'd worn since he was a boy. Only now he was taller, broader, and dressed like a man who hadn't worried about a bill in years. His watch alone probably cost more than my rent. Next to him stood Ashley, his wife. She wore a cream-colored wool coat that made her look like she'd stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. Her smile was polished, professional, like always. "Mom," Michael said, pulling me into a brief hug. "The house smells amazing." "You're just in time," I replied, forcing cheer into my voice. "Come in before the rolls burn." He stepped inside, and Ashley followed, pausing just long enough for Michael to help her out of her coat. Her eyes swept the room casual, but with a tinge of judgment. I noticed her expression flicker as she looked at the worn-out armchair in the corner, the one I refused to replace because it had been Henry's favorite. We sat down for dinner, and Michael did most of the talking about the company's expansion to Seattle, a new round of investments, some keynote speech he'd given in New York. Ashley mentioned their recent trip to France, the new spa she'd joined, and the renovations they were planning for their home in Charlotte. I nodded politely, laughed when expected, even if the conversation made me feel like I was listening from the other side of a glass wall. It wasn't until dessert that everything shifted. I had just placed the pumpkin pie on the table when Michael leaned back in his chair and smiled at me. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I've been meaning to ask you, how are you enjoying the lake house I gave you?" The words hit me like a cold slap. "The what?" I asked, setting down the pie server. "The lake house," he repeated, still smiling. "The one on Lake Monroe. I transferred it to your name for your birthday 2 years ago. Don't you remember?" I stared at him, completely lost. "Michael, I never received a lake house." His smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've never received anything like that. I would remember." Ashley, who had been sipping wine, suddenly set down her glass a little too hard. "Oh," she said, her voice a pitch higher than before. "I just remembered I need to call my mom about tomorrow's brunch. Excuse me." She stood and walked quickly toward the kitchen, pulling out her phone. Michael looked confused, concerned. "Mom, that's not possible. I had all the paperwork done through my assistant. Rebecca should have sent everything the deed. The monthly maintenance transfers." "Monthly what?" $1,500 a month, he said, "for expenses. I've been sending it to your account for 2 years. I felt lightheaded. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "Michael, I haven't seen a dime. I've been rationing my medication. Last week, I had crackers for dinner 3 nights in a row." He stood up, the legs of his chair scraping the floor. "That doesn't make sense. I have proof transfers, confirmation emails." From the kitchen, I could hear Ashley's voice, low and hurried. "Show me," I said quietly. "Show me the paperwork." Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling with shaking fingers. And in that moment, With the smell of roasted turkey still hanging in the air and pie cooling untouched on the table, I knew something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. And it had been going wrong for 2 entire years. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. Michael scrolled furiously through his phone, the muscles in his jaw tightening with each swipe. I sat frozen, my hands folded in my lap, afraid to speak, afraid to breathe. Ashley's voice drifted in from the kitchen, a soft, urgent murmur, as if her world depended on whoever was on the other end of that call. It probably did. Here, Michael said, turning the screen toward me. This is the deed transfer confirmation. Look, November 15th, 2 years ago. The property was legally transferred to you. And here's the monthly payment schedule, $1,500, every month, like clockwork. It all went through. I took the phone in shaking hands and stared at the document. My name was right there, Eleanor Carter. The address, though, was wrong. 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B. I'd never lived on Maple Street. I'd been in this same little house for over a decade. That's not my address, I whispered. Michael frowned. What? I handed the phone back to him. I've never lived on Maple Street. That's not me. He blinked at the screen, then looked toward the kitchen. Ashley? He called. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause, then the sound of Ashley clearing her throat. She reappeared in the doorway, phone still clutched in her hand, her face slightly pale. What's going on? She asked, feigning confusion. Michael didn't raise his voice, but there was steel behind his words. The address on the deed was Maple Street. Mom's never lived there. And the account number the payments have been going to, it's not hers. Ashley's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to Michael. That's impossible. There must be a mix-up. Maybe the bank got the numbers wrong. Michael turned to me. Mom, what's your account number end in? 9156, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He tapped a few keys, then turned the phone to Ashley. This says 4,782. Who has an account ending in 4,782? Ashley didn't answer. Michael's face hardened. Rebecca, he said aloud, already dialing his assistant. She'll know. Ashley reached out suddenly. Michael, wait. Let's talk about this in private. Don't upset your mother. She's been through enough today. I stared at her. Enough? You think this is upsetting me? I laughed bitterly. Ashley, I've been eating saltines and peanut butter for dinner while you planned trips to Europe. Oh, damn. Michael held the phone to his ear. After a moment, he said, Hi, Rebecca. Can you pull up the records for the Lake Monroe property and the monthly transfers for my mom? He glanced at me, then added, Yes. Put me on speaker. Rebecca's voice came through the phone, clear and professional. Of course, Mr. Carter. The deed for 1,127 Lake Monroe Lane was transferred to Eleanor Carter on November 15th, 2 years ago. The mailing address was listed as 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B. End of chapter. That's not her address, Michael said flatly. Who gave you that? There was a pause. Your wife, sir. Mrs. Carter called shortly after the deed was processed and told me your mother had moved. She asked to update the address and banking information. Michael closed his eyes. Read me the full account number for the monthly payments. Rebecca read it out, and I knew before she finished it wasn't mine. Not even close. Thank you, Rebecca, Michael said, his voice tight. I'll be in touch. Oh? He hung up and turned slowly to Ashley. Explain. Ashley's mask cracked. Her face crumpled, and tears began to fall. But I didn't see remorse, I saw fear. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, voice shaking. My parents were going to lose their house. My dad's medical bills. They were drowning, Michael. I just borrowed it. I thought I could put it back. Borrowed? I said. You stole. You stole from me. From your own mother-in-law. Ashley's hands trembled. It was never supposed to be permanent. I just needed a little time, and the lake house it was sitting empty. I thought it wouldn't matter. I stood slowly, my knees weak, but my voice strong. You thought it wouldn't matter that I was living in poverty? That I was choosing between groceries and electricity while your family lounged in a house bought with my son's money? Michael's face was unreadable. That was the scariest part. Not rage, not hurt, just nothing. You used me, he said. You manipulated me into sending money. You knew I'd want to help my mom, and you made sure I never followed up because I trusted you. Ashley stepped forward, reaching for him. We can fix this. Please, Michael, just give me a chance to make it right. With what? He asked coldly. You haven't worked a day since we got married. Everything you have was stolen from my mother. Silence fell. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be explained. The kind that says everything's already broken. I want you out of my house, Michael said quietly. Tonight. Ashley's shoulders slumped. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, turned, and left the room. The sound of the front door closing behind her was the loudest thing I'd heard all day. Michael and I sat in the living room afterward, both of us stunned into silence. The pie still sat on the table, untouched. The turkey half-eaten. It was the strangest Thanksgiving of my life, and possibly the loneliest, even though I wasn't alone. He rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I can't believe this. I thought you were okay, Mom. I really thought you were okay. I didn't want you to worry, I said quietly. You've been so busy. And I thought maybe I was just supposed to struggle. That it was normal. He looked up at me, eyes red. It's not supposed to be normal, Mom. You're supposed to have everything you need. I thought I was doing that for you. I thought I was taking care of you. You tried, I said, reaching out to touch his hand. She just made sure your help never reached me. The bitterness of it stung, but I felt something else beneath it. Clarity. Truth. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't confused anymore. I was angry. I was heartbroken. But I wasn't in the dark. Michael squeezed my hand. We're going to fix this. I don't care what it takes. Lawyers, police, accountants, whatever it takes. We're getting your house, your money, everything back. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. Okay, I said softly. But first, I want to see everything. Every document, every record. I want to know exactly what she did. Michael blinked, surprised. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I said, firmer now. I do. I spent 2 years being kept in the dark. It ends tonight. Oh, I called in sick to work the next morning. It was the first time I'd ever done that. Even when I had the flu, even when the winter wind had chapped my knuckles until they bled, I still showed up. Because rent doesn't wait. Bills do wouldn't care how you feel. And the janitor closet in the back of the finance building had become a second home to me, quiet, thankless, but steady. But that morning, I couldn't face floors or fluorescent lights. I needed answers. Of course, Eleanor. Jeanette, my supervisor, said over the phone. Take whatever time you need. Family always comes first. Family. The word sat heavy in my chest. Michael returned later that afternoon with 2 boxes of files in his laptop. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot, and the lines in his forehead seemed deeper than they had the day before. He placed the boxes on my kitchen table, the same table Ashley had sat at so many times, smiling like everything was normal. I pulled everything I could find, he said. Emails with my assistant, wire transfer records, tax documents, even screenshots of texts from Ashley around the time we set all this up. I nodded and sat down beside him. The pile was overwhelming, but I felt strangely energized. For the first time in years, I wasn't blindly accepting my life. I was taking it back. We started with the deed. My name was printed clearly on the document, signed in cursive that looked almost but not quite like mine. This isn't how I sign, I said, tracing the lines of the fake signature with my finger. I always add a loop to the E, and I never curl the L that way. Michael frowned. Let me compare. He pulled out an old birthday card I'd sent him, one of the few he'd kept in his desk. He held the 2 signatures side by side. You're right, he muttered. They're close, but not the same. This was forged. We kept going. The bank records showed the payments had been going to an account under my name, but not at the bank I used. And the routing number didn't match anything I recognized. Let's go there. I said suddenly. Michael looked up. To the bank? I nodded. I want to walk in with my ID and ask to see that account. I want to look them in the eye when they tell me I don't exist in their system. He didn't argue. Within an hour, we were standing in the marble lobby of First National Bank, a place I'd never stepped foot in until that moment. I wore my best coat, the same one I'd had for 12 years, and clutched my driver's license like a weapon. The banker behind the counter looked confused when I asked to verify an account in my name. "What's the account number, ma'am?" she asked. Michael read it off his phone. The woman's face changed. "Oh, yes, that account exists. Opened a little over 2 years ago." She typed something into her computer, then squinted. "But the address on file isn't the one on your license." "847 Maple Street?" I asked. She looked startled. "Yes, apartment 2B. "That's not me," I said firmly. "I've never lived there. Show me the signature on file." She retrieved a scanned image and turned the monitor. My name was there, but again, not in my hand. Just another copy of the same forgery. "This is identity theft," the banker said, her voice lowering with concern. "You'll need to file a police report immediately." Michael and I exchanged a glance. We weren't just dealing with a petty lie anymore. This was criminal, and we weren't done yet. Back at home, we spread the rest of the paperwork out across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Michael had not only sent monthly payments, he'd sent extra money on several occasions. "Here," he said, pointing to a transaction from last spring. "I sent $500 when I thought you needed new glasses." I never said that. "She told me you were squinting during a family dinner. Said you couldn't afford a new prescription?" He scrolled further. $800 for dental work. $1,000 for Christmas last year. I thought I was helping. My heart sank. Every dollar he'd sent in kindness had been diverted. Every thoughtful gesture, every attempt at support, it had all been twisted into fuel for Ashley's deceit. "How much in total?" I asked, afraid of the answer. Michael did the math. 43,000, he said softly. "Not including the house?" I leaned back in my chair, dizzy. $43,000. That was more money than I'd earned in 2 years. More than I'd ever had at one time in my life. Gone. "I want to see that apartment," I said suddenly. "The Maple Street address. I want to know what's there." So we drove. The building was as grim as I'd imagined, peeling paint, rusted stair rails, a neon vacancy sign blinking in the window. Apartment 2B was dark and empty. A for rent sign hung from the doorknob. She probably rented it just long enough to make it seem real, Michael said, jaw tight. I stared at the empty doorway and felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not shock, something harder, a core of steel. "She didn't just take my money," I said. "She took my name, my life." Michael nodded, but he didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my recliner, wrapped in a quilt my mother had made decades ago, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder if you're really alone or just forgotten. I thought about all the nights I'd sat here before counting pills, budgeting bills, convincing myself it was enough. It should have been better. It was supposed to be better. Ashley had stolen more than dollars. She'd stolen peace of mind, trust, dignity. But now, at least, I had the truth. And with that came power. Tomorrow, I'd file a police report. We'd go to the lawyer. We'd start the long, exhausting process of making things right. But tonight, I let myself cry. Not out of weakness, out of relief. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. The following Monday, Michael picked me up from work right after my shift. I was still in my janitor uniform, smelling faintly of bleach and pine cleaner. My knees ached, and my hands were raw from scrubbing grout. I hadn't told anyone at work what was going on, only that I had a family emergency, but I think Jeanette knew something was wrong. She patted my shoulder when I clocked out and said, "You let us know if you need anything, hon." Michael didn't say much during the drive to his lawyer's office. The silence between us was heavy but not uncomfortable. He was thinking. So was I. When we arrived, the receptionist led us into a polished, wood-paneled room that smelled faintly of leather and old paper. The man waiting for us looked exactly like I imagined. A lawyer would look gray hair, calm eyes, a perfectly pressed navy suit. He stood to greet me. Mrs. Carter, I'm Thomas Blake. Please, sit. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. I appreciated the honesty. We sat, and he opened a thick file on the table. I've spent the past few days going through everything your son provided, bank statements, property records, emails. Based on what we've found so far, this isn't just theft. This is large-scale identity fraud with multiple legal implications. Michael leaned forward. How bad is it? Blake folded his hands. Worse than we thought. And he pulled out a page and slid it across the table. Your daughter-in-law didn't just open one bank account. She opened 3, at different institutions, all using your personal information. My stomach dropped. She applied for 2 credit cards under your name. One has nearly $5,000 in charges. The other was used to apply for a small personal loan, $8,000. That loan was approved and paid out to one of the accounts opened in your name. I felt dizzy. She also filed a false tax return last year, claiming you as a dependent and reporting over $15,000 of income that never existed. The IRS has been sending notices to the Maple Street address. You're currently flagged for an audit and possible tax evasion. I sat back in my chair, the air sucked from my lungs. But I filed my taxes. I've always done it honestly. Blake nodded. I believe you. But the IRS doesn't know that yet. From their perspective, you've been underreporting income and accepting government assistance fraudulently. We'll clear it up, but it won't be easy. Michael's fists clenched on the table. How much did she steal total? Blake flipped through several pages. Including the original $43,000, the additional credit card charges, loan disbursements, and fraudulent tax returns, we estimate a total of roughly $78,000. $78,000. I couldn't even picture that kind of money in one place. I made $18,000 a year scrubbing floors. And the house? Michael asked. Blake sighed. The house is legally in your mother's name, but the deed was forged. Still, from a legal standpoint, the property belongs to her. Unfortunately, Ashley's family has been living there, making improvements with the stolen funds. That complicates things. We'll need to get law enforcement involved. This isn't just civil, it's criminal. Oh, will she go to jail? I asked quietly. Blake looked at me, then nodded. If we pursue this, and I think we should, yes. She could face significant prison time. I looked at Michael. His expression was unreadable. Where is she now? I asked. At the lake house, Michael replied. She went straight there after I asked her to leave. Of course she did. That afternoon, we drove to Lake Monroe. I had never seen the house. I didn't even know what it looked like. But as we pulled into the long driveway and the trees parted to reveal the view, I sucked in a sharp breath. It was beautiful. A wide, one-story ranch with a wraparound porch, big windows facing the lake, and mature oaks lining the property. The water glittered under the late autumn sun, and I could already picture what it might look like in spring flowers blooming along the shoreline, ducks gliding across the surface. This was what Michael had wanted for me. A peaceful place to retire. A view. A bit of quiet. Ashley's father opened the door. His face fell when he saw us. Mrs. Carter, he said quietly. Michael, is Ashley here? Michael asked. Yes, she's inside. He stepped aside and let us in. The house was even more stunning inside polished wood floors, soft lighting, clean and tasteful decor. There were family photos on the mantel, photos I'd never seen before. Ashley's parents smiling in front of the lake. Her brother and his children building a snowman on the back deck. A life I hadn't even known was being lived in my name. Ashley appeared at the hallway entrance. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized sweater, and looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Margaret, she said softly. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I never meant for it to go this far, she continued. It started with the first payment my parents needed help with the mortgage. I thought I could repay it, but then it kept going. And the lake house, we needed a place to stay. You stole my name, I said, my voice calm but cold. You made me a criminal in the eyes of the IRS. You used money meant to keep me safe and let me starve. Tears poured down her cheeks. I didn't know it would get so big. You had 2 years, Michael said flatly. You could have told us at any time. I didn't know how to stop, she sobbed. I panicked. Mister, Blake stepped forward with a folder in hand. Mrs. Carter, we need to be clear. You will have to vacate the property within 30 days. The funds used to furnish and improve this home were obtained through fraudulent means. You cannot keep what was stolen. Ashley's mother had stepped into the room, looking stunned. We didn't know, she whispered. We thought Michael was being generous, that he wanted us to have this. Oh, I looked at her, this woman, probably close to my age, and saw the disbelief, the devastation. I believed her. I believed they didn't know. But Ashley had known. She'd known every time she smiled at me. Every time she watched me bring store-brand cookies to family holidays. Every time she said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." She hadn't taken care of me. She'd erased me. That night, back home in my small house, I sat at my kitchen table and let the silence settle in. It was no longer the silence of poverty or loneliness. It was the silence before something big began. The lawyer would file charges. The police would investigate. Ashley would go to court, and I would take back what was mine. My name, my identity, my peace. But it wouldn't come all at once. It would come in pieces. And I was ready to collect every single one. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The police station smelled like old coffee and floor wax. There was a vending machine humming in the corner and a flickering fluorescent light above the front desk. Everything about the place made me feel small. Michael held the folder tight in his hands, the one the lawyer had prepared. It was stuffed with every piece of proof we had. Bank records, forged signatures, false tax returns, photos of the Maple Street apartment, copies of my real ID next to the forged documents. I still couldn't believe we were here. A young officer greeted us and took down our names, then brought us into a small interview room with beige walls and a lopsided clock. A few minutes later, a detective walked in, Detective Carmen Reyes. Mid-40s, no nonsense, but her eyes were kind. She shook my hand. Mrs. Carter, I've read the preliminary file your attorney sent over. I understand this is difficult. Would you be comfortable walking me through it in your own words? I nodded, though my throat was tight. Michael gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. And I began. I told her everything from the Thanksgiving dinner when Ashley snapped, to the moment I realized the address was fake. I described the visits to the bank, the forged documents, the house I never knew existed. I spoke slowly, holding nothing back. Detective Reyes took notes, but mostly just listened. She didn't interrupt or doubt. Her presence was steady, like a lighthouse in fog. When I finished, she nodded. Thank you. What happened to you is serious. It may take a few weeks for our financial crimes unit to go through everything, but based on what I see here, we'll be opening a full investigation. Michael leaned forward. How long before charges are filed? We'll need to interview Ashley and verify the funds trail, but given the strength of your documentation, I'd say fairly soon, and will likely involve the district attorney within the month. I asked the question that had been burning in the back of my throat. Will I get my name cleared? With the IRS? With the banks? She gave me a soft smile. Yes, ma'am, that's part of our job. But it will take some time. And some patience. I nodded. I could give them both. Later that evening, Michael took me to a diner just off Route 12, the kind with booths lined in cracked red vinyl and photos of the local high school baseball team on the walls. I used to come here in high school, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. After games, we'd eat pancakes at midnight and talk about the future like we had forever. I stirred my tea. And now? He looked out the window. Now, I wish I'd asked more questions. We were quiet for a while. A waitress came by, poured us coffee without asking. I watched her walk away and thought how nice it must be to live in a world where nothing has been stolen from you. I feel stupid, Michael finally said. I should have seen it. You were losing weight. You looked tired. And every time I asked how you were, you said fine, like it was a shield. I reached across the table and touched his hand. You were doing your best. You were trusting the person you loved. That's not stupid, Michael. That's human. He looked at me with wet eyes. I was supposed to protect you. You did, I said gently. You're here now. That's what matters. Over the next week, I met with a forensic accountant from Mr. Blake's office. A woman named Naomi who had a laugh like wind chimes and a brain like a calculator. She laid everything out. How Ashley had moved money from one account to another. How she'd used prepaid debit cards to avoid detection. How she'd listed fake expenses on my supposed tax filings. She's methodical, Naomi said, which makes this easier to trace but also proves this wasn't an accident. This was a plan. I nodded. I already knew that, but hearing it aloud still hurt. In the evenings, I started journaling. It began as a way to track what was happening legally, but soon it became more than that. I wrote down things I hadn't said in years. The day my husband died. The first time I realized Ashley didn't like me. The grocery list I kept repeating in my head to stay within my $20 budget. My own voice came back to me page by page. One night, I wrote, "This is not just about money. It's about being seen. About knowing I matter, even when I'm invisible to the ones around me." I didn't show that to Michael, but I think he felt it. Then came the call. Detective Reyes phoned to let me know Ashley had been brought in for questioning. She didn't deny anything. She cried. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know how to undo what she'd done. She wants to plead guilty, Reyes told me. Her lawyer is requesting we consider a reduced sentence in exchange for full restitution. Restitution. It meant repayment. It meant money might come back, but nothing could return the nights I'd cried alone. The pride I'd swallowed. The fear I'd felt each time a bill arrived. I need time to think, I told her. Of course, she said. It's your choice. That weekend, I went to the lake house one more time. It was empty now. The windows were bare. The furniture was gone. Even the bird feeders had been taken down. I stood on the porch, looking out over the water. The wind stirred the reeds. A duck glided across the far end of the lake, unbothered by the mess humans make. I stepped inside. The walls still smelled faintly of cinnamon. In the bedroom, there was a forgotten pair of socks in the closet. A post-it note with a grocery list. Milk, bread, mascara. I sat on the floor and closed my eyes. This was supposed to be my home. Not a palace, not a prize, just a place to grow old, drink coffee on quiet mornings, read books by the fireplace. Ashley had robbed me of that. But standing there, I realized something surprising. She hadn't destroyed it. It was still mine. And I would live in it someday, not with anger, not with shame, but with peace. The key felt unfamiliar in my hand. Michael handed it to me outside the lake house on the first day of March. The air was still cold, but the snow had melted back into the ground, leaving patches of brown grass and muddy footprints. Birds chirped from the trees, as if the world had decided to start again. Just like me. You sure you want to be alone tonight? Michael asked, rubbing the back of his neck. I nodded. I think I need to be. For the first night, at least. And he looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he gave me a one-armed hug and kissed the top of my head. Call me if you need anything. I'm only 20 minutes away. I watched his car disappear down the gravel road. Then I turned toward the house. It was quiet. Still smelled faintly like cinnamon and wood polish. The floors echoed under my shoes as I walked from room to room, taking it all in. The windows stretched wide across the lake, offering a view that made my chest tighten, not from sadness this time, but awe. This place was mine. Not a gift, not a hand-me-down, not a lie. Mine. I slept on the couch that night. The bedroom felt too large, too echoey. The fireplace gave off a steady warmth, and I wrapped myself in a throw blanket, drinking tea while the logs crackled. I watched the moon ripple across the water. I let the silence surround me. Not the kind of silence that hurts, but the kind that heals. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to an alarm. I didn't check the bank account. I didn't run mental calculations for rent or groceries. I just breathed. It felt foreign, but good. Over the next few days, I started making the house my own. I replaced the stiff, impersonal curtains with soft ones I bought at a thrift store. I found an old wooden chair by the roadside and painted it robin's egg blue. I put it on the back deck, right where the sun landed in the morning. Michael came by on Sunday with a box of books and a new kettle. "I figured you'd want something to read," he said, setting them on the kitchen counter. "And that old kettle you had looked like it belonged in a museum?" I laughed. "That kettle's been with me since 1987. Well, it's earned its retirement." He lingered for a while, helping me hang a picture and fix a squeaky hinge on the pantry door. I could see in his face the relief knowing I was safe, knowing I was standing on solid ground again. Before he left, he turned to me and said, "You know, I don't think I ever apologized properly. For not knowing. For not seeing." I shook my head. "You don't have to. I want to." His voice cracked. "I thought I was giving you everything you needed, but I never asked what you wanted. I didn't see the gap between intention and reality." I touched his hand. "It's not your fault I didn't speak up. We both assumed too much." He nodded, eyes glassy. Then he pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than most. On Wednesday, a package arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside was a small envelope with a note. "I know sorry isn't enough, but I'm sending it anyway. I've begun making payments toward restitution. I hope one day you can forgive me, Ashley." Also inside was a check. The first of many, apparently. $10,000. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed the money, though, yes, I did, but because it represented something else. Proof that the world sometimes turns back toward balance. Proof that guilt could be powerful enough to open locked hearts. I didn't know if I would ever forgive Ashley, but I wasn't as angry as I used to be, and maybe that was enough for now. I started a new routine. I walked the path by the lake every morning, wrapped in a heavy sweater and gloves. The air bit at my cheeks, but it reminded me I was alive. Birds fluttered around me. Deer prints lined the mud. The world was moving again, even if it was just one cautious step at a time. I started journaling not just about the past, but the present. I wrote down things I saw. A red-winged blackbird on a branch. A boy fishing on the other shore. A squirrel stealing seed from the empty feeder. I called it proof of peace, because I needed to remember that good things still happened. That joy didn't always come loudly but softly, like footsteps in the snow. On the second Sunday in April, I hosted dinner. Just Michael and me. I cooked roast chicken with rosemary and potatoes. Set the table with linen napkins. Lit 2 candles. Not because I had company, but because I wanted the moment to feel special. Michael brought dessert peach pie from that little roadside bakery we both liked. "I've missed this," he said, slicing into the pie. "Just us. Just being." "Me too." There was a moment of silence between us. Not awkward, just full. "Mom," he said finally, "what do you think comes next?" I looked out the window, where the sun was setting in lavender streaks across the lake. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think I finally get to decide for myself." He smiled. "That's all I wanted for you." And for once, I believed it. It arrived in the mail on a Tuesday. Just a plain envelope with a faded blue stamp and handwriting I didn't recognize at first, shaky but familiar in a way that made my heart slow down. I turned it over, stared at the return address. Mary Ellen Worthington, Bloomington, Indiana. And suddenly, I was 23 again. Mary Ellen and I had been best friends once. We met in college, both of us majoring in literature, both of us working the campus library desk after class. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a way of telling stories that made even Shakespeare sound like your next-door neighbor. We'd been inseparable back then. Shared secrets, boyfriends, dreams. We even promised we'd grow old, living in side-by-side houses with screened-in porches and wildflower gardens. But life didn't follow that script. After graduation, she moved to Chicago for grad school. I stayed in North Carolina and got married. For a while we wrote letters. Then they slowed. Then stopped. I always meant to reach out again. I just didn't. Until now. The letter inside was short. A single page, written in that same looping cursive I remembered from our library notebooks. "Dear Eleanor, I don't know if this will reach you, or if you'll even want to hear from me, but I saw your name in a newspaper article last week, something about a fraud case and a woman reclaiming her life. The photo was small, but I'd recognize your eyes anywhere. I hope you're okay. I've thought about you often over the years, and I've regretted letting the distance win. If you're open to it, I'd love to talk, even if it's just once. Fondly, Mary Ellen. I read it 3 times. By the third time, I realized I was crying. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my lap and the letter clutched in my hands. The lake was quiet. The moon hung low and golden. Michael had offered to come by after work, but I told him no, I needed space. I needed to think. Mary Ellen. The name felt like a song I hadn't heard in years. It brought back the scent of library books and late-night coffee, of summers filled with laughter and plans. But it also brought guilt. I was the one who let us drift. She had written the last letter, years ago. I never answered. What do you say to someone after so much time has passed? I'm sorry felt too small. I missed you felt too late. But I still wanted to try. The next morning, I wrote back, Dear Mary Ellen, I got your letter, and you were right. I'd know your handwriting anywhere. Even after all these years. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. Life has been strange lately, and painful, but also full of unexpected gifts. Your note was one of them. I don't even know where to begin. Maybe we don't need to explain everything. Maybe we can just start again. If you're ever in North Carolina or if you want me to come visit, I'd love that. With warmth, Eleanor. I mailed it that afternoon. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a door creak open that I thought had been sealed shut forever. A week later, she called. Her voice was older, softer, but unmistakably hers. Eleanor? She said. And just like that, 50 years fell away. We talked for 2 hours. About everything and nothing. About her teaching career, her 2 daughters, her garden full of tomatoes and basil. About my house, the lake, Michael, and what had happened with Ashley. She didn't judge. She just listened. At one point, she said, You were always stronger than you thought. You know? I laughed. You used to say that back in college. I meant it then, too. By mid-May, she came to visit. She arrived with a suitcase full of books and a plate of lemon squares. I didn't know if you still liked them, she said, but I remembered they were your favorite. I hugged her harder than I thought I would. We spent the weekend walking by the lake, making tea, staying up late, talking like girls again. The years fell away in layers. We didn't need to explain every absence or apology. We just picked up where we left off. On Sunday morning, we sat on the back deck, feet propped up on the railing, mugs of coffee in hand. She turned to me and said, You ever think about what would have happened if we'd stuck to our plan? The porches? The wildflowers? I smiled. All the time. But maybe, she said. This is that life. Just later than we thought. And I realized she was right. Mary Ellen stayed for 4 days. We spent most of the time cooking, laughing, remembering. The lake house became softer, warmer, like it had finally taken a breath after holding it in for too long. On her last morning, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching a heron glide low over the water. Neither of us spoke for a while, and I didn't feel the need to. You ever think it's too late to start again? I asked finally, my breath visible in the cool spring air. She smiled without looking at me. I think starting again is just what life is, over and over. I held on to that. The day after she left, I drove into town to pick up groceries and return a library book I'd forgotten I even borrowed. It felt good to be among people again. The sounds of traffic, distant conversation, the jingle of the cafe doorbells, it all made me feel connected, like a thread stitched back into a larger quilt. At the grocery store, I wandered the aisles slowly. Lemons, eggs, a bouquet of tulips for the kitchen table. When I turned into the coffee aisle, I nearly bumped into someone pushing a cart the other way. Oh, I'm sore. I stopped mid-sentence. He looked up at the same time. We both froze. Eleanor? He said slowly, cautiously. I hadn't seen Daniel Harper in nearly 38 years. Daniel and I had been neighbors once back when Noel and I lived in the small house on Oak Street. He was recently divorced then. Quiet but friendly, always offering to help shovel snow or fix a fence. Back then, I'd been wrapped up in raising Michael and managing the house. Still, there had been a brief, unspoken kindness between us. A sense that, under different circumstances, maybe there could have been more. We lost touch after he moved north for work, and now, here he was, in the coffee aisle. Older, grayer, but unmistakably him. Daniel, I breathed. Wow. Oh, he smiled, a little crooked. That's the reaction I was hoping for. We stood there, unsure whether to hug or shake hands or simply stand still. Finally, I laughed and leaned in. He hugged me tightly, warmly. "What are you doing in St. Clair?" I asked. "My daughter lives here now. I moved down last year to be closer to the grandkids." I nodded. "I live out by the lake." "I heard," he said gently, "about what happened. I'm sorry, Eleanor." His eyes held no pity, only empathy. "Thank you," I said softly. "I'm okay now." He smiled again. "I'm glad. You look strong." That word stayed with me. We ended up having coffee at the diner down the street. Just like that. Years folded like pages of a book. He told me about his time in Maine, his retirement from teaching, his granddaughter's obsession with frogs. I told him about Michael, about the garden I was trying to start, about the lake house that now finally felt like mine. "Do you still write?" he asked at one point. I blinked. "You remember that? You used to sit on your porch with a notebook every evening." I smiled. "I journal sometimes. Nothing serious. You always had a way with words." I looked out the window, unsure of how to respond. Compliments felt foreign these days, but nice. That night, I sat with my journal open and pen in hand. "Life is made of doors," I wrote. "Some we walk through without thinking, some slam shut, and some, unexpectedly, open again." I wasn't looking for romance. I wasn't even sure I was looking for friendship, but I was looking for truth. And there was something true in the way Daniel had looked at me, not as someone to fix or save, but someone to see. That alone was rare enough. The next few weeks passed gently. I planted marigolds along the back fence. Michael helped me put up a new bird feeder. I mailed lemon squares to Mary Ellen with a note that read, "They're still my favorite. Thank you for remembering." And every Friday morning, Daniel and I met for coffee. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we just sat in silence, sipping and watching the world move. I found myself laughing more, thinking less, letting things be. One Friday, as we sat by the window at the cafe, Daniel turned to me. "I was wondering," he said, hesitant, "if you'd like to come to the farmer's market with me tomorrow. They've got live music, good peaches, no pressure." I looked at him, at his kind eyes, his weathered hands. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. The morning air smelled like cinnamon and fresh earth. Daniel picked me up just after 8. He was driving an old green truck that looked like it had stories of its own scratches on the sides, a faded dream catcher hanging from the rearview mirror. "You ready for some peaches and fiddle music?" he asked with a grin. I smiled. "Lead the way, cowboy." The farmer's market wasn't far, just 15 minutes into the valley. The sun was still low, casting long, golden shadows through the pine trees. We drove with the windows down, the breeze catching my scarf and making me feel, for just a moment, like a younger version of myself. It was the first time in a long while I hadn't worn grief like a second skin. The market buzzed with weekend life families with strollers, college kids in sandals, older couples holding hands like it was still 1972. Wooden stalls lined the main strip, bursting with color-red tomatoes, yellow squash, hand-painted signs, wildflowers in mason jars. A local band was tuning up by the gazebo, and I caught the faint strains of a fiddle cutting through the air like sunlight. Daniel handed me a canvas bag. "Rule number 1 of market mornings: never come empty-handed." I laughed. "Rule number 2? Always get the peaches first. They go fast." We made our way through the crowd, stopping to sample cheeses and chat with the honey vendor who reminded me of my grandmother, round face, apron dusted with flour, voice soft as moss. There was something deeply comforting about being part of it all again. I wasn't hiding behind walls or silence. I was present, alive. At the peach stand, I held one to my nose and closed my eyes. The smell took me back to summers long gone barefoot in the backyard, sticky fingers, laughter echoing from the kitchen. Good one? Daniel asked. Perfect, I said. We bought 4. He insisted on carrying them. Next, we wandered toward a stand selling old records and handmade soaps. Daniel picked up a Hank Williams vinyl and held it up like treasure. I found a lavender bar wrapped in paper printed with pressed ferns. Still love lavender? He asked. Always. We sat on a bench near the gazebo, peaches in hand, while the band played a slow, winding tune that reminded me of riverbanks and Sunday afternoons. Daniel peeled his peach carefully, like it was some kind of ritual. I just bit into mine. Juice ran down my wrist, and I laughed like a kid caught in a good mess. He looked at me, really looked, and smiled in that quiet, unspoken way. You're glowing today, he said gently. Must be the fruit. I think it's something more. I didn't know how to answer that, but I didn't turn away either. After the market, we drove up to a little overlook above the lake. It wasn't planned, just a winding detour, the kind that feels like destiny instead of accident. We stood at the edge of the hill, looking down at the glimmering blue. Do you ever wish, Daniel said softly, that life had a rewind button? I thought about that. I used to, I admitted. For a long time, especially after Noelle died. And before that, when I started to lose pieces of myself and didn't even realize it. He nodded. I know that feeling. But now, I paused, tasting the words. Now I think I'm learning to live without looking over my shoulder. Daniel didn't say anything. He just reached for my hand, and I let him take it. That evening, back home, I stood by the window watching the sky turn from peach to lavender to dusk. There was a stillness inside me I hadn't felt in years. Not the kind that comes from isolation or exhaustion, but the kind that grows when something broken inside finally begins to mend. Daniel had offered nothing more than time, kindness, and presence. And that had been everything. I wrote in my journal that night, some things don't need fixing, they just need space. Some hearts don't need saving, they just need to be seen. It was late on a Wednesday afternoon. Rain tapped gently on the window, the kind that didn't ask for an umbrella, just patience. I had just finished folding laundry and was about to sit down with a cup of tea when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a year, soft, cautious, and unmistakably hers. Eleanor, it's Ashley. I froze. For a heartbeat, I considered hanging up. But something kept my hand still. She didn't launch into apology. She didn't cry or beg. She simply said, I know, I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But I've been meaning to call, for months. I just didn't know if I deserved to. I stayed quiet. The rain kept falling. I'm in a different place now, she continued. Therapy, a new job. I'm not calling to justify anything I did. There's no excuse. I'm trying to make peace with the damage I caused. And still, I said nothing. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know what lived inside me in that moment. Forgiveness? Resentment? Emptiness? She let out a breath. I saw Michael last week. He told me you're doing well, that you're at the lake house. Yes, I said finally, voice low. I am. I'm glad, she said. You deserve peace. There was something about hearing her voice again, not like it used to be, sharp and guarded, but quiet, tired even. I imagined her sitting in a small apartment somewhere, phone clutched in hand, heart pounding just like mine. I sent the payments, she added. I know money doesn't fix what I broke, but it's something I can do. I'll keep sending them. I received them, I said, and I noticed the note. She was silent. Then, I didn't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see it now how cruel I was, how blind. A part of me had waited for this. For over a year, I had rehearsed what I might say if Ashley ever called, how I'd confront her. Ask her why she smiled while she stole. Why she never once apologized during the hearings. Why she let me believe, for so long, that I was a burden. But now, those questions didn't feel important anymore, because the answers wouldn't change the past. Only the present mattered. I'm not sure what to say, I admitted. That's okay, she replied. You don't have to say anything. End of quote. But I found myself speaking anyway. I wanted to hate you, I said quietly. After everything. Not just for what you did to me, but for how you made Michael suffer. He believed he failed as a son, and that guilt almost destroyed him. There was a pause. I know, she whispered. I see that now. I see a lot of things now. I closed my eyes. I don't know if I can forgive you, I continued. But I also don't want to carry this weight anymore, hating you. It costs too much. Ashley sniffled on the other end. That's fair, she said. More than fair. I didn't invite her to visit. I didn't ask how she was living or who she was with now. But before we hung up, I said something I hadn't planned. I hope you keep going, I told her. I hope you don't stop trying to be better. There was silence, and then a sound like a tear dropping. Thank you, she whispered. And then the call ended. I sat there long after the phone had gone silent. Not sad, not angry, just quiet. Rain still tapped on the windows, steady and soft. I thought of all the ways we build prisons for ourselves out of guilt, out of silence, out of shame, and how sometimes healing isn't about freedom. It's about loosening the chains just enough to breathe again. That night, I wrote in my journal, forgiveness isn't a gift you give the other person. It's the moment you stop feeding the fire inside you. It doesn't make the hurt disappear, but it gives it somewhere soft to rest. Daniel brought it up on a quiet Saturday morning, over biscuits and marmalade. I was thinking of heading up to Asheville for a few days, he said, stirring his coffee. Catch the leaves before they're all gone. I looked up from my plate. That sounds nice. He hesitated, then added, I'd love some company. If you're up for a little adventure? I hadn't left the county in nearly 2 years. The thought of winding roads, crisp air, and fiery treetops stirred something deep in me, something that had been still for too long. I'd like that, I said, surprising even myself. We left early Monday morning. Daniel's old truck rumbled like a loyal dog as we wound through hills and valleys. The trees were a riot of color, crimson, gold, burnt orange. The kind of beauty that made you go quiet without realizing. We didn't talk much on the drive, but the silence was full, not empty. Comfortable. Every now and then, I'd glance over at him, hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the road like it was something he knew by heart. And maybe he did. Asheville was cooler than home. The mountain air had a bite to it, clean and sharp like fresh linen. We checked into a small inn tucked into the hillside, all wood beams and quilts and old photographs of strangers who once stood where we now stood. Our rooms were side by side. I figured separate keys made sense, Daniel said gently, handing me one. But I'm glad you're here. So am I. We spent the next 2 days doing almost nothing and everything at once. We wandered bookstores and drank too much coffee. Saturday under trees and said little. Ate warm bread with butter at roadside diners and listened to bluegrass spilling from front porches. We hiked one short trail, nothing ambitious, but enough to make our lungs work and our cheeks flush. At the summit, we looked out over miles of mountains rolling like waves. Feels like we're standing on the edge of something, I said. We are, Daniel replied, his voice softer than wind. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. That night, we built a small fire behind the inn. Daniel poured us each a finger of bourbon and handed me a blanket. Above us, the stars came out slow and shy. A kind of hush settled over everything. After a long stretch of silence, he said, I used to think love was supposed to come fast. You know? Fireworks. Thunder. Like in the movies. I nodded. But now, he went on, I think maybe real love is more like this. Quiet. Earned. A slow blooming. I looked at him. The firelight danced on his face, casting shadows and gold. There was a steadiness to him I hadn't known I needed. I think you might be right, I said. We didn't kiss. We didn't say anything dramatic. But something shifted between us that night. Like a stone in a river finally finding its resting place. Not passion. Not drama. Just belonging. The next morning, We drove to a nearby overlook with steaming coffee in hand. Fog curled over the hills like breath. Daniel reached for my hand without a word. I let him, and as we sat there, warm and still, I realized something I hadn't dared admit. I was happy. Not giddy, not euphoric, just deeply, quietly happy. And for me, that was everything. That night, I wrote in my journal, "You don't always know when a chapter ends, but sometimes you feel when a new one begins. Not with a bang, but with a held hand, a mountain morning, a steady heart." The air smelled like pine and old soil when we returned home. Leaves had started to fall in earnest. The trees around the lake looked tired, like dancers taking their final bow after a long, vivid performance. Daniel helped me carry my bags inside, his touch warm against the sudden chill in the air. "Call me tomorrow?" he said. "I will," I promised, smiling. He waited a moment, then gently brushed a hand over my shoulder and left. I stood alone in the doorway of my kitchen, suitcase still at my feet, a quiet sense of peace settling over me. I was home. Changed, but home. The next morning, just as I was folding a blanket on the couch, Michael knocked on the door. I opened it and saw my son face calm, eyes a little tired, but lighter than I'd seen in months. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping in. We hugged. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't stiff. It was real. He made coffee while I put out the banana bread I'd picked up in Asheville. We sat at the table, steam rising between us. And then he said it. "I've been talking to Ashley." I didn't flinch, but I felt it like cold water down my spine. "I thought you were done with her," I said, careful not to sound accusing. "I was," he said. "And I still might be. But lately, I don't know. She's been different." I stared at my mug. "She called me," I said softly. "A few days ago." He looked up. "She did?" I nodded. "Said she's in therapy, trying to rebuild her life." "She told me that too," Michael said. "I don't know if I believe her yet, but I saw something in her I hadn't seen in a long time. Vulnerability. Honesty, maybe." I stayed quiet. He sipped his coffee, watching me like he used to when he was small, waiting to see if he was safe to say more. "She asked if I'd consider talking to her face to face," he continued. "No expectations, no promises." "And will you?" I asked. "I think I might," he said. "Not because I trust her again. Not yet. But because I don't want to carry the bitterness anymore. It's eaten at me for too long." He looked at me carefully. "I know what she did to you was unforgivable. And if you never speak to her again, I get it. But I need to make my own peace, Mom." I nodded slowly. "I know," I whispered. "You do." Forgiveness is complicated when the wound isn't just yours. Part of me wanted to scream, to remind him of the lies, the stolen money, the way Ashley turned him against me when he trusted her most. But the other part, the wiser part, saw something else. My son wasn't asking for permission. He was asking for grace. For the freedom to choose healing, even if it looked different from mine. After he left, I stood at the edge of the lake for a long time. The wind tugged at my sweater, and the water shimmered with shifting light. I thought about all the ways love gets tested, not just by betrayal, but by how we choose to rise after it. Michael was choosing to rise. Could I let him? Could I honor his pain without clinging to my own? That night, I wrote in my journal, "There comes a time when your pain is no longer the center of the story. When your love for someone must be big enough to let them forgive, even when you're not ready to." The next day, Michael called. "I've invited Ashley to meet at the park next weekend, just to talk. I wanted you to know." I thanked him for telling me. And then, after a long pause, I said something I hadn't planned. "If you do see her, tell her I meant it, that I hope she keeps trying." Michael's voice cracked. "I will," he said. "Healing doesn't look the same for everyone. For some, it's a quiet walk beside a mountain. For others, it's the courage to face the one who broke you and see a person instead of a monster. For me, it was both. And that, I was learning, was enough." The letter came on a Thursday. Tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer, it was the only envelope with handwriting on it slanted, deliberate, familiar. I recognized the loops in the Y before I even saw the name. Ashley. I stood by the mailbox for a long moment, the afternoon breeze rustling through the trees. Then I walked inside, set the groceries down, and opened it carefully like something sacred. Dear Eleanor, this isn't a letter asking for forgiveness. You owe me nothing. I know that. But I wanted to thank you. Not just for what you said to Michael, but for surviving what I put you through with grace, for not turning your son against me when you had every right to, for answering the phone that day, for wishing me well. Your words have echoed in my head every day since. I hope you keep trying. I don't think I ever understood what it meant to be seen. Not until that moment. I sat down. The letter trembled in my hands, the ink slightly smudged like it had been rewritten more than once. Ashley went on. I've joined a support group. Women like me. Women who've made terrible mistakes and are trying to rebuild not just their lives but their souls. One of them told me something I've been thinking about for weeks. That growth doesn't begin with shame. It begins when someone believes you can be more than your worst decision. You didn't have to believe in me. But the fact that you didn't slam the door shut, that changed something. She talked about her new job at a shelter, about how folding blankets and serving soup had taught her more about dignity than any job she'd ever had in finance. How humility had become a daily practice, not a punishment. And then came the part that made my breath catch. Michael told me you're amazing with children, that you once helped run a literacy program back in college, that you used to bake muffins for the neighborhood kids. I've been volunteering at a children's reading center on weekends. They're looking for someone to mentor the older girls, someone calm, patient, who understands what it means to rebuild from nothing. I gave them your name. Only if you want to, of course. No pressure. But I thought, maybe this is something we could do not for me, but for them, for the girls. I read that paragraph again and again. It felt impossible, and yet, not wrong. I thought of the girls' faces I hadn't even seen, trying to grow up in a world full of silence and shame, trying to trust, to speak, to be heard. I thought of how many times I had wished someone would ask me to help, not just heal. I set the letter down and looked out the kitchen window. The lake shimmered quietly, a single duck gliding across its glassy surface. I remembered a day from long ago standing at the sink, covered in flour, watching Michael teach a neighbor kid how to spell umbrella with fridge magnets. He couldn't have been more than 10. I remembered the sound of laughter, the smell of cinnamon, the way the sun poured through the curtains. That woman, she hadn't disappeared. She'd just paused. Daniel came by that evening. I showed him the letter. He read it slowly, carefully, then looked up at me. What are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe this is how I move forward, I said. Not by pretending nothing happened, but by using what did to help someone else. He nodded, quiet pride in his eyes. She's trying, he said softly. And so are you. Later that night, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper and a pen. I didn't know what I would write back. Not yet. But I knew I would. Because sometimes, forgiveness isn't a door you open for someone else. It's a light you leave on for yourself. I wrote in my journal, the past doesn't vanish, but sometimes it folds itself into the foundation of something new. And if you're brave enough to build on it, you might just find beauty where you once found only rubble. The meeting was set for Saturday. Ashley had suggested the reading center neutral ground. Familiar to her, unfamiliar to me. I drove there slowly, my hands steady but my heart unsure. I hadn't seen her since the courtroom, since the headlines, since she had looked right past me like I was air. But this wasn't about me. Not entirely. I reminded myself of that with every turn of the wheel. The center was tucked behind a church, modest, warm, with bright paper butterflies taped to the windows. Inside, a girl no older than 7 waved hello before disappearing behind a shelf of picture books. Ashley stood near the back, her hair tied up, sleeves rolled. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not younger, just softer. When she saw me, her eyes widened. She didn't move toward me right away. Instead, she simply said, "Hi." I nodded. "Hello." It wasn't awkward. It wasn't warm either. But it was honest. We sat in 2 chairs that had clearly been used for countless story times. Mine creaked under the weight of memory more than my body. Ashley clasped her hands in her lap. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't," I replied. She smiled, a little sad. That would have been fair. We sat for a moment in silence. Not heavy this time, just cautious. "I brought something," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a binder worn at the edges, filled with paper and post-it notes. "This is the mentorship outline," she explained. "It's rough, but the bones are there. The idea is to pair each teen with a woman who's been through something. Not perfect, not polished, just present." She handed it to me. I flipped through pages filled with ideas, sample sessions, journaling prompts, stories, hard questions, gentle ones. "You wrote all this?" I asked. She nodded. "I started it in group, then added more as I volunteered. I kept thinking, what would I have needed at 15? I looked up. "And you think I belong in this?" "I think you've already lived what most of them are afraid to even name." We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about the house, or Michael, or lawsuits. We talked about girls. Girls with too much silence in their homes. Girls who don't know how to speak without shaking. Girls who think pain means they are broken forever. And we talked about what it might mean to meet them in that pain, not to fix them, but to sit beside them in it. One girl wandered by maybe 12, with chipped nail polish and a sharp look in her eyes. She glanced at Ashley, then at me, and asked, "You, the new lady?" Ashley looked to me. I smiled. "I might be," I said. "You think that'd be okay?" The girl shrugged. "As long as you don't make us do those trust falls. I don't like falling." I chuckled. "Me neither." She nodded. "Then you're fine." And just like that, I was in. After she left, Ashley turned to me, her voice lower. "Eleanor, this isn't about wiping the slate clean. I'm not trying to pretend none of it happened." "I know," I said. "I just want to use it. The mess, the wreckage, maybe even the guilt." "You're not the only one who's wrecked things," I told her. "Pain doesn't make us holy, but maybe it makes us useful." Her eyes welled with tears. She blinked them back. I never expected this. I didn't either. We stayed another hour, sketching out the first meeting, laughing more than I expected, watching as 2 other girls argued over who got to read aloud next. Before I left, Ashley walked me to the door. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for coming. You didn't have to." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "I didn't come for you, Ashley," I said, then smiled gently. "I came because there's still work to do." That night, Daniel brought dinner, chicken, soup, and cornbread. I told him about the day. He didn't interrupt. He didn't analyze. He just held my hand while I talked, nodding at all the right moments. When I finished, he kissed the back of my fingers and whispered, "You've turned grief into shelter. Not everyone can do that." Later, I lit a candle by the window and wrote in my journal, "We cannot undo the storm, but sometimes, in the aftermath, we find enough wood to build a roof for someone else still caught in the rain." One quiet morning, I sat on the screened porch watching the sun rise over Lake Morrison. A light breeze stirred the wind chimes by the door, and the sound reminded me of something my late husband once said. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air. I'd been living here for nearly a year now, in the house that was meant for me from the beginning, but only recently had it started to feel like it was truly mine. Not because of the title deed or the money recovered, but because I'd finally stopped looking at it as something stolen and started seeing it as something returned. Not everything in life comes back the way it should, but this time, by some grace I still don't fully understand, it did. When people in town ask how I managed to stay so calm through it all, I never know quite what to say. It wasn't calm. It was heartbreak. It was betrayal and grief and the aching weight of being overlooked by someone I had welcomed into my family. But when I look back now, I think the thing that saved me most was knowing that I hadn't lost everything. Not really. David never stopped loving me. He just got misled. And once the truth came out, he never hesitated to make it right. That means more than money ever could. One evening after dinner, as we watched ducks settle on the lake, he asked me, Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? I thought for a moment and said, yes. And no. Oh, because while I would never wish pain on anyone, the truth is this pain led to something better. It cleared the air. It brought clarity, honesty, and healing. It reminded me of a verse I'd heard once, as a girl sitting in Sunday school, one that stayed with me all these years. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Genesis 50:20. At the time, I hadn't understood what that really meant. But I do now. Victoria meant to take advantage of me, to erase me quietly while she built a life with what was mine. And for a while, it worked. But in the end, what she intended to break me only revealed how strong I really was. Through all of it, God didn't abandon me. He allowed the truth to rise. He restored what was lost. And He gave me something I didn't know I needed. A second beginning. These days, I spend my mornings with coffee on the porch, my afternoons in the garden, and my evenings reading beside the fireplace. I still keep my old janitor's badge in a drawer. Not because I miss that life, but because it reminds me where I came from and how far I've come. David visits every week, and he started dating again. This time, he's cautious. He laughs more now real, deep laughter that comes from knowing who's worth trusting. As for me, I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I'm at peace. This is my story. It started with a stolen house and a lie, but it ends here by the lake, in a home filled with warmth, memory, and a quiet kind of joy. To those who are listening, if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt forgotten or used, please remember this. Sometimes the harm done to you becomes the very path that leads you back to yourself. And even when people mean to do you wrong, there is a force in this world stronger than betrayal. Call it grace. Call it justice. Call it what you like. But it always, eventually, finds its way. Just like I did. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my little porch voice has traveled. And if you're ready for more, I've left 2 of our most powerful stories linked right here at the end. I promise they'll stay with you. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, you're never too old to start again.